The chilling wind howled as an Apache woman faced a terrified cowboy. "We need to have a baby." A dying tribe's fate hung precariously. The silent mountain man saw a terrifying secret in her eyes, a detail no one dared speak. What happens next will shatter everything they know. This desolate, unforgiving land was his sanctuary, a world where the only true constant was the relentless cycle of life and death, of winter's bite and spring's fragile promise. Silas had long been its silent guardian, his existence a tapestry woven from the harsh threads of survival and the profound solitude he had chosen. His cabin, a sturdy fortress against the elements, was nestled deep within a hidden valley, its stone hearth a lone beacon in the vast, inky blackness. Here the scent of pine and wood smoke was a perpetual comfort, and the only sounds were the whisper of snow settling, the distant cry of a wolf, or the rhythmic thud of his axe splitting logs, each strike echoing in the profound silence. His hands, calloused and strong, knew the land intimately, reading its signs like an ancient scripture. He valued quiet strength, the stoicism of the solitary hunter, and the unwavering resolve required to face each dawn alone. His scars, etched deep into his skin, were tales of rigorous winters, of encounters with formidable beasts, and of battles fought not with men, but with the very indifference of nature itself. He believed in the harsh, simple truths of the mountains, where sentiment was a luxury often paid for with life. Yet, even in this isolated domain, the currents of human destiny found their way. Before him, illuminated by the flickering, dancing flames, sat two figures as starkly different as day and night. Thomas, a cowboy, young and restless, a drift of dust and regret clinging to his worn leather. His eyes, though wary, still held the fleeting hope of a future he had yet to claim. And Awan, an Apache woman, her face a canvas of quiet strength, her eyes dark and ancient, reflecting the wisdom of generations who had walked these very lands. She embodied a stillness that spoke of profound loss and an unyielding will to endure. The tension between them was a living entity, more suffocating than the dense fog that often rolled down the treacherous slopes, blurring the line between earth and sky. It was in this heavy silence that Awan had delivered her stark decree to Thomas. Silas, from his vantage point, understood with a clarity that stung his own solitary heart. This was no flight of youthful fancy, no impulsive plea for love. Awan's voice, though soft, carried the weight of a people teetering on the precipice of oblivion. Her clan, ravaged by the insidious grip of pale-faced sickness and the ceaseless attrition of skirmishes, was fading like smoke against the mountain sky. She saw not passion in Thomas, but possibility, not romance but a lifeline. His blood, a conduit to the encroaching world, could offer a chance to mend a broken lineage, to forge a fragile bridge of peace where only chasm existed. Silas, who had observed her quiet dignity, her tireless labor, and the unwavering light in her spirit, felt a deep, unspoken respect for this woman. He recognized her desperate strategic act of survival, a truth that seemed to elude the bewildered cowboy. A deep, silent ache resonated within the mountain man, a recognition of his own emotional barrenness, the isolating walls he had built around his heart. He was a guardian of this land, yes, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he could not be the father of the future Awan sought. His path was one of solitude, not legacy. Thomas, his face etched with confusion and fear, stammered a reply, his young mind grappling with the monumental duty laid before him. He saw only a bewildering, impossible request, unable to comprehend the profound honor woven into Awan's pragmatic proposal. His words were clumsy, a tangle of excuses that fell flat in the vastness of the night. Silas, his chosen isolation now a thin veil, felt the tremor of an inevitable shift. The world he had carefully curated, a world of silent mountains and predictable rhythms, was about to be irrevocably altered. He had always been an observer, a shadow in the wild, but now a force, unseen and powerful, was pulling him into the heart of this human drama. The choice before him was stark: remain a spectator to their uncertain fate or step forward, leaving his solitary existence behind, and irrevocably intertwine his destiny with theirs. He took a single, deliberate step out of the encompassing darkness. The cowboy Thomas found himself utterly unprepared for such a pronouncement. His world, until this moment, had been a series of open roads and fleeting horizons, a hurried escape from a past he dared not fully acknowledge. Awan's words struck him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He felt a tremor run through him, a stark contrast to the steady, unyielding presence of Silas, who remained a silent, unmoving sentinel in the periphery of the firelight. Thomas's youthful face, usually quick to a nervous smile or a defensive scowl, was now a mask of bewildered terror. He stammered, searching for a graceful refusal, for any word that might lighten the immense weight of the duty Awan had so plainly laid at his feet. His eyes flickered between the determined gaze of the Apache woman and the impenetrable shadows where Silas stood, seeking some reprieve, some understanding. He could only see the colossal, terrifying responsibility, not the honor that Awan, with her ancient wisdom, had offered. The scent of pine resin, usually a comfort, now felt heavy, suffocating, as if the very forest pressed in on his fear. His desperate, fumbled excuses dissolved into the vast, indifferent silence of the mountains. Then, from the deeper gloom, came a shift. Silas moved. It was not a hurried motion, but a deliberate unfolding, the rustle of buckskin and the soft crunch of earth under his heavy boots. He emerged, stepping into the liminal space between fire and darkness, his towering frame casting a long, wavering shadow that momentarily swallowed Thomas. The air grew heavier, charged with an unspoken authority that only a man forged by the wild could command. Silas's presence was a physical force, his gaze, though calm, holding the weight of countless observations, of seasons weathered and lives seen to their ends. With a voice that scraped like dry earth on stone, a sound accustomed to carrying across vast distances, Silas addressed the young cowboy. He spoke not in an accusatory tone, but with the stark, unvarnished truth of the high country. He explained that in these lands, where existence itself was a constant negotiation with the elements, love often found its genesis not in tender whispers or fleeting passions, but in the unwavering commitment to shared survival. It was a bond forged in mutual need, in the raw, elemental truth of ensuring continuity. The mountain man articulated that a refusal, a turning away from such a profound calling, was more than just a personal slight. It was an act that could ripple through generations, an unforgivable abdication of a fundamental human duty. He spoke of how, in the heart of the untamed West, a man's true measure was not in how he fled his past, but in how he embraced the future, especially when that future demanded courage and sacrifice. To refuse such a sacred trust, Silas suggested, was to condemn not only a fading lineage, but the very soul of the man himself to an eternal irrelevance, a cowardice far deeper than any skirmish or misdeed he might have sought to escape. Awan listened, her face impassive, yet Silas understood the full, unspoken tragedy she carried. He knew, with the keen insight of one deeply attuned to the pulse of the land, that her clan was not merely suffering from disease and conflict. Their very spirit, their stories, their way of life, were being systematically extinguished by the relentless tide of a new world. Each fading elder, each lost child, was a thread unraveling from a tapestry centuries old, leaving gaping holes in the fabric of their existence. This plea for a child was not merely a desire for progeny, but a desperate attempt to weave a new thread, one that might bridge the canyon between their fading traditions and the encroaching settlers. It was a desperate gamble for the very soul of her people. Silas's words made Thomas realize the true magnitude of Awan's proposal. It was a chance not just to father a child, but to become an integral, vital link in a chain of survival, a bridge between worlds on the verge of collapse. The mountain man's rough voice carried a subtle, almost imperceptible undertone, suggesting that for Thomas, whose own past was clouded with unspoken regrets and a sense of wandering aimlessness, this very duty might offer a singular, profound path to absolution. It was an unspoken offer of redemption, a chance to anchor his restless spirit to something meaningful, to finally find purpose beyond escape. This was not a random encounter, but an intricate weaving of destinies, a call to a higher, more demanding form of strength. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the dark, mimicking the sparks of uncertainty and dawning comprehension in Thomas's eyes. The weight of Silas's words, combined with Awan's unwavering gaze, pressed down upon him, forcing a profound shift within his youthful heart. He looked past the fear, past the discomfort, to the stark, urgent necessity that permeated the mountain air. He understood, not with a sudden flash of courage, but with the slow, heavy inevitability of a glacier moving down a valley, that his path had veered irrevocably. His old world, a landscape of solitary flight and self-preservation, now seemed distant, small. He looked around the desolate yet oddly sacred space at the vast, indifferent peaks towering overhead, at the silent, expectant faces of the mountain man and the Apache woman. His breath caught, a final, almost imperceptible gasp for the freedom he was about to relinquish. With a heavy sigh that carried the weight of a monumental decision, Thomas took a step forward, not towards Awan, but into the unyielding, challenging embrace of a future irrevocably tied to the fate of these mountains and the desperate hope of a people. The next morning broke with the crisp, unforgiving clarity of an alpine dawn. The air, thin and sharp, carried the scent of frozen earth and distant pine. Thomas, his sleep fitful and haunted by the gravity of the previous night's exchange, woke to the sight of Silas already at work, his axe a rhythmic thud against a thick log, a steady testament to the mountain man's unyielding routine. Awan, too, moved with quiet purpose, gathering wild herbs near the stream. The makeshift camp, which had served as their temporary refuge, now felt charged with a different kind of tension, no longer merely of survival, but of a shared, uncertain future. The cowboy felt like an intruder, a misplaced element in a landscape of harsh harmony. Silas, sensing the young man's unease, indicated with a silent gesture towards his cabin, a sturdy bastion against the raw power of the mountains. It was a place of stark utility, built with muscle and resilience, each log hewn, each stone laid, a defiance against the untamed wilderness. This was Silas's domain, a sanctuary he had forged with his own hands, a reflection of his own solitary nature. Thomas followed, his boots crunching on the frosted earth, feeling the weight of the mountain man's unspoken expectation. The air within the cabin, though warmed by a smoldering hearth, held the scent of aged wood, cured leather, and something else, a faint, almost metallic tang that hinted at something more than mere domesticity. It was a scent that spoke of a life lived on the edge, a subtle aroma of blood and iron, of battles won and secrets kept. Awan arrived shortly after, her hands filled with foraged plants, her eyes scanning the cabin's interior with an almost imperceptible assessment. The interaction between her and Silas was minimal, yet profound. Their gazes, meeting across the rough-hewn table, conveyed a language older than words, one of mutual respect, born of an understanding of the wild's brutal lessons. Silas, for his part, offered no grand welcome, no soothing words. His hospitality was an unspoken agreement, a necessary transaction in this unforgiving world. He made it clear, not with a direct statement, but through the deliberate nature of his actions and the economy of his gestures, that this was not an invitation to comfort, but an offer of stark shelter. He was a reclusive guardian, his cabin a bulwark against the untamed, and Thomas and Awan were refugees, albeit ones with a profound purpose. The silence between them was not empty, but filled with the unstated questions, the cautious appraisals. Silas watched them, his eyes like those of a hawk, taking in every subtle nuance, every hesitant movement. He measured their worth, not by their lineage or their past, but by their capacity to adapt, to contribute, to survive. Thomas struggled to find his footing in this new environment. His cowboy skills, honed on open plains, seemed ill-suited to the dense forest and treacherous peaks. He stumbled over roots, misjudged distances, and found the mountain man's stoic silence an intimidating barrier. Awan, however, moved with an innate grace, her knowledge of the land a silent language. She knew which berries were safe, which plants healed, and how to track game through the trackless snow. Yet, for all her quiet competence, Silas's vigilance remained. He had built this refuge for himself, a bulwark against the world, and now two strangers, for all their pressing need, were disrupting its carefully maintained equilibrium. He kept his distance, always observing, always assessing, his hand never far from the long rifle that leaned against the hearth. The very air around him seemed to hum with a cautious distrust, a silent question mark hanging over their presence. Then, as the first full day in the cabin drew to a close and the long shadows of the mountains stretched across the valley, an old weathered journal emerged. It was not revealed by Silas himself, but was discovered by Thomas, tucked away beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth. The binding was worn, the pages brittle, filled with elegant faded script. It chronicled not only the geological formations and wildlife patterns of the region, but also detailed observations of ancient trails, forgotten spring sources, and, most startlingly, intricate sketches of Apache symbols, identical to a small, intricate carving Awan wore on a deerskin thong around her neck. The journal spoke of a deep, scholarly fascination with the very people Awan represented, a hidden connection that ran far deeper than mere geographic proximity. It hinted at a previous, profound exploration of her ancestral lands, a knowledge that seemed to betray Silas's outwardly reclusive nature. Silas, his gaze hardening as Thomas inadvertently revealed the journal, stepped forward. His voice low and deliberate, he spoke of the mountain's immutable laws, of the delicate balance required to survive its harsh embrace. He looked from Awan to Thomas, his eyes holding a profound seriousness. His cabin, he stated, was a place of sanctuary, yes, but not of charity. The mountains demanded constant vigilance, tireless effort, and an unwavering respect for its rhythms. If they were to stay, if he was to offer his protection and his hard-won knowledge, they too must contribute. Their presence here, their very survival, would come at a cost, not of coin, but of purpose and unwavering effort. His words were a gauntlet thrown, a direct challenge to their will. He offered not comfort, but a stark, uncompromising bargain, a haven forged in the wild, in exchange for their labor, their adherence to the mountain's strict rules, and a deep, abiding respect for the solitary life he had chosen. This fragile, nascent alliance, born of a desperate plea, was now bound by the rigorous demands of the high wilderness, a place where weakness was a luxury no one could afford. The days that followed were a testament to the mountain's relentless demands and the quiet resilience of those who sought its refuge. Thomas, initially clumsy and out of place, began to adapt. Silas, a hard taskmaster of few words, would dispatch him with curt instructions to mend fences, haul water, or chop wood. Each swing of the axe, each careful step across treacherous ground, chipped away at the cowboy's former restlessness, replacing it with a growing sense of purpose. He learned to read the subtle shifts in the wind, to distinguish the cry of a distant coyote from the snarl of a bear, to respect the raw power of the wilderness. Slowly, laboriously, he began to earn the grudging nods of approval from Silas, small acknowledgments that carried more weight than any lengthy praise. The scent of wood smoke clung to him, mingling with the earthy smell of the forest, becoming a part of his new identity. Awan, however, blossomed in a different way. While Thomas wrestled with the physical demands of the mountain, she brought a quiet order to the cabin. Her hands, nimble and wise, transformed the stark dwelling. She sorted dried herbs, cleaned and mended buckskin, and with an intuitive understanding of domesticity, began to infuse the Spartan space with warmth. The rough pelts became softer coverings, the sparse meals more nourishing. She understood the language of the hearth, the subtle art of coaxing a flickering flame into a roaring, comforting fire. Silas, for all his outward stoicism, noticed the changes. The cabin, once merely a shelter for survival, began to hum with a gentle life, a subtle transformation from a place of grim necessity to one of quiet, unassuming comfort. He often found her humming low Apache melodies as she worked, a sound that brought a strange, unfamiliar peace to the rugged walls, a melody that resonated with the forgotten corners of his own hardened heart. He discovered that her knowledge extended beyond herbs. She understood the subtle art of storytelling through weaving, creating patterns that held ancient meaning. One blustery afternoon, as a sudden snow squall threatened to engulf the valley, a critical supply of dried venison, stored precariously in an old lean-to, was revealed to be infested with weevils. Thomas stood baffled, his usual quick fixes useless against such a creeping pestilence. Silas merely frowned, his usual solution being to discard and rehunt, a costly endeavor in the deepening winter. It was Awan who stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. She instructed them to gather specific bitter herbs, to build a small, contained fire, and to use the smoke to fumigate the remaining good meat, a method passed down through her people for generations. She demonstrated, her movements precise and confident, how to carefully separate the tainted from the salvageable, how to cure the rest with a mixture of salt and a rare, pungent spice she had somehow managed to procure. Her actions were not merely practical. They were imbued with a quiet authority, a knowledge that superseded their own rugged but limited understanding of the wilderness's subtle challenges. She was not a warrior, but a provider, a healer, a keeper of vital, unspoken wisdom. This quiet, unassuming competence, a trait Silas had initially overlooked in his assessment of her physical needs, now revealed itself as a profound and indispensable asset. Her ability to mend, to heal, to find sustenance and comfort where others saw only scarcity, began to weave itself into the very fabric of their days. The cabin, under her careful hand, was transforming from a bare-bones survival post to something warmer, something more akin to a home. It was not a grand or dramatic change, but a slow, tender blossoming, like mountain wildflowers pushing through late snow. Silas, ever the observer, found himself watching her with a newfound respect, a curiosity that tugged at the edges of his guarded heart. The hard lines around his mouth seemed to soften, almost imperceptibly, as he witnessed her gentle yet unwavering strength. She was not just a refugee. She was a quiet force of nature, mirroring the very resilience of the land he protected. Just as a fragile sense of routine, almost peace, began to settle into the isolated valley, a new shadow fell. Early one evening, as the first stars pricked through the twilight, the distinct sound of a distant rifle shot echoed through the valley. Too close, too purposeful to be a hunter. It was followed by the faint baying of hounds, not the wild call of a wolf pack, but the disciplined, relentless cry of trained hunting dogs. A chill, colder than any winter wind, seeped into the cabin. Silas, his hand instinctively going to his rifle, knew at once that this was not a random occurrence. The sounds, so deliberate and menacing, were not just a disruption. They were a direct challenge to the fragile sanctuary he had created. This intrusion, he knew, heralded a threat far more insidious than any storm or wild animal, a danger that would test the very foundations of their nascent, fragile home. The baying of the hounds grew closer, an ominous chorus echoing through the night. The rifle shot had been a warning, a deliberate intrusion into Silas's carefully guarded solitude. Inside the cabin, a silence descended, heavy and suffocating. Thomas's face, pale in the firelight, registered a raw terror. His past, it seemed, had caught up to him with the relentless precision of a predator. Awan, however, moved with a quiet urgency. She began to secure the cabin, checking the sturdy door, closing the rough wooden shutters, her movements quick and practiced, reflecting a lifetime lived in a state of alert preparedness. Silas, his eyes glinting in the dim light, peered through a narrow slit in the wall, his posture taut, a coiled spring ready to unleash. A lone figure, mounted on a dark horse, emerged from the tree line, followed by two more. They were not mere hunters but hard-faced men, their presence radiating a cold, predatory intent. Their leader, a man with a cruel, knowing smile, dismounted. His voice, cutting through the night, called out Thomas's name, laced with a promise of retribution. The very air outside seemed to crackle with menace. Silas knew they were outnumbered, and the element of surprise was lost. A direct confrontation would be bloody, perhaps fatal, and would risk not only their lives but the fragile hope that Awan carried. The mountain man's mind, accustomed to rapid strategic thinking, began to work, weighing possibilities, assessing weaknesses. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the cabin's tense quiet. Awan, who had been retrieving a forgotten pouch from a shelf, stumbled, clutching her stomach. A low groan escaped her lips, and her face contorted in pain. Thomas, fear momentarily forgotten, rushed to her side, his young hands hovering helplessly. Silas, turning from the loophole, saw the true depth of her distress. This was no feigned illness. Her body was racked with a sudden, debilitating agony. The future she sought, the life they were trying to protect, hung in the balance. Thomas, panicked, looked to Silas, his eyes pleading. "We have to get her out," he whispered. "She can't stay here." It was in this moment of double crisis, the immediate threat outside, the dire situation within, that Silas's true nature, long hidden beneath layers of reclusive stoicism, fully emerged. His decision was swift, decisive. He would use the terrain, his knowledge of every hidden path and treacherous slope, to buy them time. He instructed Thomas, his voice clear and resonant, to take Awan through the secret passage behind the hearth, a narrow, winding route known only to himself, leading to a hidden cave higher up the mountain. "Wait for my signal," he commanded, his eyes meeting Thomas's with an unwavering intensity. Silas then moved with deliberate speed, grabbing his hunting knife, a long rope, and a few carefully selected flares. He would draw the enemy away, lead them on a wild chase through the treacherous, snow-laden passes, giving Thomas and Awan a chance to escape. It was an act of profound, selfless courage, a testament to the fact that his commitment to their survival now superseded his own. As Thomas, gently guiding Awan through the tight earthen passage, heard the thud of Silas barring the cabin door behind them, a profound realization dawned upon him. The mountain man, initially a figure of intimidation and silent judgment, was revealing a depth of self-sacrifice he had never encountered. He wasn't just a protector of the land, but a guardian of life willing to face almost certain death to ensure their future. Thomas felt a surge of something akin to awe, a dawning understanding of the true meaning of strength. Hours later, after the sound of distant shouts and scattered gunfire had faded, and the first blush of dawn painted the eastern sky, Thomas and Awan emerged from the cave. They found Silas not at the cabin but at a hidden spring, his face grim, his breathing ragged, but alive. His clothes were torn. A deep gash ran across his arm and his leg was bleeding from a graze. He had drawn them into the mountain's labyrinth, leading them astray, disorienting them until they finally gave up the pursuit. As Awan, her pain now subdued by the herbs she had brought, tended to his wounds with a quiet reverence, the emotional walls between the three shattered. The false bravado Thomas had worn, the stoic reserve Silas had maintained, the quiet suffering Awan had endured, all dissolved in the face of shared trauma and hard-won survival. Later, huddled around a rekindled fire in the now damaged cabin, the true confession began. Silas spoke, his voice rough with exhaustion, of the terrible fever that had claimed his wife and infant son years ago, leaving him with an unutterable grief and a haunting sense of his own powerlessness. He spoke of how he had sought solace in the silent, unforgiving embrace of the mountains, a self-imposed exile from a world that had dealt him such cruel blows. His reclusion, he revealed, was not merely a choice but a desperate act to protect his heart from further pain. Awan then shared the story of her clan, not just the physical decimation, but the slow, agonizing erosion of their spirit, the loss of their lands, their traditions, their very identity. She confessed the immense burden of being one of the last, the weight of a lineage poised to vanish. Thomas, in turn, spoke of his own past, a tangle of poor choices, a misguided loyalty, and the crushing guilt of a friend betrayed, a life lost in a skirmish he had started. The air in the cabin, thick with the scent of wood smoke and shared sorrow, became a sacred space. They were no longer merely three disparate souls bound by circumstance, but a fragile alliance forged in fire and grief. They were all outcasts, each bearing the heavy scars of a past that refused to release them, yet finding in each other a solace they had long believed impossible. The shocking truth was not an external secret, but the raw, honest unveiling of their deepest vulnerabilities, their shared humanity. In that moment, a profound bond solidified between them, a quiet understanding that they were, in their shared brokenness, slowly building something new, something stronger. Awan's gaze, when it met Silas's, held a depth of gratitude and a dawning, tender affection, not romantic, but rooted in the bedrock of shared sacrifice. Her hands, as she carefully bound his arm, lingered for a moment longer than necessary. The mountain man, for the first time in years, felt the faint stirring of a warmth in his chest, a flicker of hope that perhaps, even for him, solace might still be found, not in solitude, but in the heart of this unexpected found family. The harsh edge of winter slowly yielded to the tentative breath of spring. The air, once sharp with ice, now carried the sweet scent of thawing earth and emerging life. In the aftermath of the attack, a quiet transformation settled over Silas's valley. The cabin, though still bearing the marks of the skirmish, now felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The shared trauma, the confessions exchanged around the fire, had stripped away the layers of guarded solitude that had defined their lives. Thomas, no longer merely fleeing, found himself anchored, his restlessness replaced by a deepening sense of belonging. He learned from Silas, not just the ways of the mountain, but the quiet strength of unwavering protection. He learned from Awan the patience of the earth, the language of healing herbs, and the profound beauty of her ancestral stories, whispered over shared meals. Awan, in turn, moved with a newfound lightness. The burden of her people's fate, though still heavy, was now shared. Her laughter, a soft musical sound, occasionally echoed through the cabin, a sound Silas hadn't heard in years. She taught Thomas about the cycles of the moon, the meaning behind the star patterns her ancestors had navigated by, and the intricate dances of the local wildlife. Their bond, born of a desperate need, now deepened into a genuine adult affection, quiet yet profound, rooted in mutual respect, and shared dreams for a future they were now actively building together. Silas observed this budding connection with a complex mixture of wistful acceptance and a deep, quiet satisfaction. He found himself drawn into their world, sharing his own extensive knowledge of the mountain's secrets, pointing out medicinal plants, tracking game with an almost silent grace. He was no longer just their protector, but a silent mentor, a steadfast anchor. One evening, as Awan meticulously repaired a tear in a worn map that Silas kept, her fingers traced a faint, almost invisible symbol etched into the parchment, a mark similar to one she had once seen carved into an ancient rock formation near her ancestral lands. Silas, watching her, slowly unfurled another, much older document from a hidden compartment within his sea chest, a worn letter from his own great-grandfather. The faded script detailed an expedition into the very heart of the mountains generations ago, an ancestral quest for rare minerals, and mentioned a crucial alliance formed with a specific Apache clan, known for their deep knowledge of the land's hidden veins. It described a small, intricately carved stone, given as a token of respect, bearing the very symbol Awan had noticed on his map. This revelation, that their families had been unknowingly connected by an ancient alliance, generations before their paths crossed in this remote valley, solidified their bond with a sense of destiny, a feeling that their meeting was not merely chance, but the inevitable weaving of separate threads into a common tapestry. It was as if the mountains themselves had been guiding their convergence. The days passed in a gentle rhythm of shared labor and growing affection. Thomas and Awan spoke of the future, of rebuilding, of creating a legacy that honored both their worlds. They planned a small garden, envisioned improvements to the cabin, and spoke in hushed tones of a new life, a new beginning in this quiet sanctuary. Silas would listen, his gaze often distant, a faint melancholic smile playing on his lips. He found a strange peace in watching their hope blossom, a solace in knowing he had helped cultivate it. However, the peace of the mountain, like its weather, could be fickle and unpredictable. One crisp afternoon, as Thomas and Silas were returning from checking their traps, a flicker of movement caught Silas's keen eye. High on a distant ridge, silhouetted against the pale sky, was a lone rider. The rider paused, seemed to scan the valley with an unnerving deliberateness, then turned and vanished over the crest. It was a fleeting glimpse, easily dismissed as a lone prospector or a stray trapper, but Silas felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. The rider's posture, the way the horse was held, the distinct, almost predatory stillness, spoke not of random wandering, but of calculated reconnaissance. Hours later, as dusk settled, transforming the peaks into dark, imposing silhouettes, a distant, thin wisp of smoke curled against the horizon, far beyond their usual hunting grounds, yet undeniably closer than any friendly outpost. It was not the rich, fragrant smoke of a homesteader's hearth, but a harsh, acrid plume that hinted at something more sinister. The wind, which had been a gentle caress all day, suddenly picked up, carrying with it a faint, unsettling scent of burning wood and something else, something metallic and sharp, carried on the chilling current. Silas, his jaw tightening, knew with a profound certainty that the fragile peace they had so painstakingly built was about to be shattered. The mountain, which had offered them sanctuary, was now preparing to test their resolve once more. The threat, unseen yet palpable, was returning, poised to strike at the heart of their nascent home. The acrid scent of distant smoke grew stronger with the deepening twilight, a pungent reminder that the sanctuary of their valley was once again breached. The mountain, a silent protector for so long, now felt ominously exposed. Silas, his senses honed by decades of wilderness living, spent the night restless, patrolling the cabin's perimeter, his eyes scanning the ridgelines, his ears straining for any unnatural sound. He knew the signals of danger in these high places, and the lingering smell of that unnatural smoke, combined with the sighting of the lone rider, spoke of a deliberate, encroaching threat. The next morning, the proof arrived. 3 men, rough-hewn and menacing, rode into the valley with a chilling swagger, their horses' hooves churning the pristine snow. They were not subtle. Their intent was as clear as the winter air. At their head rode a man with a scarred face and cold, assessing eyes, Elias Thorne, a notorious bounty hunter, whose reputation for relentless pursuit and brutal efficiency preceded him like a dark omen. He had been a ghost from Thomas's past. A man hired by the vengeful family of the friend Thomas had betrayed, and now he had found his quarry. But Thorne's gaze was not solely on Thomas. It lingered on Owen, a predatory glint in his eyes. He saw not just a woman, but a valuable asset, perhaps a means to further his own ambitions. Thorne's voice, harsh and demanding, cut through the quiet of the valley. He declared that Thomas was wanted for his past transgressions, and that Awan, as an Apache woman found living with white men, was to be taken back to a distant reservation, a fate Silas knew was often worse than death. The bounty hunter asserted that she was not free to choose her own path, that she was merely property to be controlled. The implication was clear. They had come not just for justice, but to dismantle the very foundation of the life Thomas and Awan had begun to build. Silas, standing firm at the cabin door, a formidable, unyielding presence, felt a primal urge to protect the fragile hope that had blossomed in his valley. This was no longer just about Thomas's past. It was an assault on their nascent family, a direct challenge to the sanctuary he had forged. His hand rested on the hilt of his hunting knife, his eyes, usually so stoic, now burning with a fierce, protective fire. Suddenly, another voice called out, not from Thorne's men, but from a nearby copse of pines. A 4th rider emerged, slender and clad in finely tailored, if trail-worn clothing. It was a woman, her face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but her posture radiating an unexpected authority. She dismounted with a fluid grace, revealing a polished pistol tucked into her belt. Her name was Eliza Vance, and she introduced herself as a representative of a fledgling land development company, expressing a keen interest in the strategic location of Silas's valley, hinting at its potential for mining or a new settlement. She spoke with a smooth, persuasive tone, suggesting that Thorne's presence was merely a convenient coincidence, that his men could also serve as security for her mapping efforts. Her words, though polite, carried an insidious undercurrent, revealing a cunning ambition that sought to exploit both the land and its inhabitants. She was not merely a secondary threat. She was a subtle, calculating force, using Thorne's brute force as a smokescreen for her own designs, intending to claim not just the people, but the very earth beneath their feet. The cabin was surrounded. The air crackled with a palpable tension. Silas knew a direct fight would be a massacre. He looked at Eowyn, then at Thomas, a silent, desperate question in his eyes. He saw the terror in Thomas's face, the raw fear for Eowyn's safety, but also a new resolve, a willingness to face his past. He looked at Eowyn, her gaze steady, resolute, accepting of whatever fate lay before them. A decision, agonizing and profound, formed in Silas's mind. With a heavy heart, Silas stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. He would act as a decoy. He offered to lead Thorne and Eliza's men on a wild chase through the most treacherous, unforgiving passes of the mountain, places only he knew how to navigate. In return, he demanded that they allow Thomas and Eowyn safe passage out of the valley, a clear head start. He reasoned that Thomas, now marked, would be endlessly pursued, and Eowyn, as a valuable prize for Thorne and a nuisance for Eliza, would be in constant danger. His offer was a sacrifice, a desperate gamble to buy them time, to ensure their survival, even if it meant his own. He was the mountain man, the guardian, and now he would put his life on the line to uphold the sacred trust he had unknowingly taken on. He looked at Thomas, his eyes silently conveying the heavy instruction, "Protect her, and build the future we spoke of." A tear, cold and sharp, tracked down Thomas's cheek as he understood the magnitude of the man's sacrifice. To save their nascent family, their hope for a future, Silas was willingly walking into the jaws of certain danger, choosing to become the bait, the solitary defender against an encroaching, relentless world. The heavy silence that followed Silas's proposition was broken only by the hiss of the wind through the pines. Thorne, his eyes narrowed, weighed the offer. The prospect of chasing Silas through the treacherous mountain passes was unappealing, but the guarantee of Thomas and Eowyn's capture, without risking his own men in a direct assault on the fortified cabin, held a certain allure. Eliza Vance, ever calculating, saw an opportunity to remove Silas, the stubborn obstacle to her valley development plans, and still secure Eowyn, whom she might use to gain leverage with the local tribes. A brutal, pragmatic agreement was struck. Thomas and Eowyn would be given a day's head start, and then Thorne and his men, guided by Silas, would pursue. The farewell was swift and stark. There were no grand declarations, only a shared glance that spoke volumes. Thomas, his face etched with a mix of gratitude and fear, gripped Silas's hand, his eyes conveying an unspoken promise to honor the sacrifice. Eowyn, her gaze steady, pressed a small, intricately carved stone, identical to the one on Silas's map, into his palm. It was a gesture of profound trust and a silent prayer for his safe return. Then, under the watchful, predatory eyes of Thorne and his men, Thomas and Eowyn vanished into the dense forest, heading west, towards the distant plains. Silas, his heart a heavy stone in his chest, turned to face his fate. He led Thorne and Eliza's men on a relentless chase, not along the obvious trails, but through the mountain's hidden arteries, narrow, icy ravines, precipitous ledges, and thickets so dense they tore at flesh and fabric. He was a phantom in his own domain, using every rock, every shadow, every shift in the wind to his advantage. He would disappear and reappear, drawing them deeper, higher, until they were disoriented and exhausted. The crack of rifles echoed sporadically as they tried to corner him, but Silas, intimately familiar with every twist and turn, every blind spot, evaded them with the agility of a mountain cat. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the western peaks in fiery hues, Silas led his pursuers into a particularly treacherous area known as the Serpent's Tooth, a labyrinth of jagged rock formations and sudden dizzying drops. He knew this place intimately, every hidden crevice, every unstable rock face. His plan was simple, brutal, and utterly desperate. He would use the mountain itself as his weapon. He planted a series of small, strategically placed charges, not of gunpowder, but of carefully collected, dried mosses and resins that would burn with a thick, acrid smoke, signaling his location, but also obscuring the true path. He intended to separate his pursuers, to create chaos. Then, at a narrow chasm, where a single, rickety rope bridge spanned a terrifying drop, Silas made his stand. Thorn and his remaining men, strung out and furious, finally cornered him. Eliza Vance, ever the observer, watched from a safe distance, her face alight with a cold triumph. Thorn, his voice hoarse with rage, demanded his surrender, but Silas, standing firm on the trembling bridge, merely smiled. "You want me, bounty hunter? Then come and get me." As Thorn cautiously stepped onto the bridge, Silas performed his final, decisive act. He did not fight with brute force, but with the subtle, intimate knowledge of the land. With a powerful swing of his axe, he severed one of the main support ropes of the bridge. The ancient timbers groaned, and the structure began to sway violently. Panic erupted among Thorn's men. Just as Thorn was about to fall, Silas, with a shocking, unexpected act of mercy, extended his hand, not to save him, but to push him towards Eliza. "The mountain takes what it is owed," Silas rasped, his eyes fixed on Thorn, but not without a witness. The bridge collapsed with a roar, sending logs and men plunging into the abyss. Thorn, caught by Eliza, clung desperately to the edge of the chasm, saved by a thread. Eliza, her face a mask of shock and fury, watched her men disappear. Silas, however, was gone, vanishing in the cloud of dust and splintered wood, leaving behind only the echoing sound of the falling bridge and the chilling roar of the mountain. The battle was not won through superior force, but through a profound understanding of the environment and a shocking strategic act of mercy. Thorn, now broken and defeated, his men lost, clung to Eliza, who had narrowly escaped the same fate. The mountain had exacted its toll, but Silas had ensured that Eliza, the calculating opportunist, remained to witness Thorn's utter failure. He had not killed them, but used the mountain's fury to neutralize their threat, leaving them stranded and defeated, their ambitions shattered by the sheer, unyielding power of the wilderness. The immediate threat was vanquished, but the harsh reality of their survival, a stark testament to the mountain's implacable will, hung in the frigid air. As the last echoes of the bridge's collapse faded, a new question emerged, carried on the chilling mountain wind. Had Silas truly survived, or had he become one with the unforgiving peaks he so fiercely protected? The mountain wind continued its ancient song, sweeping through the passes, carrying tales of heroism and loss across the vast, indifferent landscape. Years unfolded, each season painting the high peaks in new hues of green and white, of autumn gold and spring rebirth. The legend of the mountain giant, a man who vanished into the very heart of the peaks after a thunderous collapse, became a whispered tale around distant campfires, a cautionary story of those who dared challenge the wilderness, and of the fierce protector who defended it. The cabin in Silas's hidden valley, once a solitary bastion, now hummed with life. The rough-hewn walls resonated with the soft murmurs of a new family, the gentle rhythm of a world rebuilt. One late spring afternoon, almost a decade after the confrontation at the Serpent's Tooth, Awan stood at the cabin door, her silhouette framed against the golden light of the setting sun. Her hair, now streaked with silver, was braided with mountain flowers, and her face, serene and strong, held the wisdom of a life lived fully. Beside her stood Thomas, his youth replaced by a quiet gravitas, his cowboy swagger now tempered by the steadfastness of a mountain man. His hands, still quick and capable, often found hers, a silent testament to a love that had grown from necessity into an unbreakable bond. Their eyes followed a figure moving with graceful agility across the valley floor, a young man, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, his movements a fluid blend of Apache stealth and cowboy swagger. His skin was the color of rich earth, his dark eyes sharp and observant, inheriting the keen perception of both his parents. This was Little Bear, their son, a living bridge between two worlds, the vibrant legacy of Awan's desperate plea and Silas's profound sacrifice. He paused by the flowing stream, carefully placing a small, intricately carved wooden animal, a gift, onto a flat stone. It was an offering, a silent tribute to the mountain giant, a ritual he performed with a solemn reverence, just as his mother had taught him. He understood in his young heart that the continued life in this valley, the very air he breathed, was a gift from a mysterious, powerful spirit who watched over them from the highest peaks. As Little Bear disappeared into the growing shadows, following a deer trail with an intuitive understanding of the wild, Awan turned to Thomas, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She spoke of how the ancient stories of her people, once whispered only in fading circles, were now sung in the valley, taught to their children, woven into the very fabric of their daily lives. The herbs she tended, the language she spoke, the respect for the land she embodied, all flourished, not in isolation, but in a vibrant, living synthesis with Thomas's own pioneering spirit. He, in turn, had learned to farm the rich soil, to build stronger fences, to trade fairly with both settlers and tribes, becoming a bridge builder in his own right, his past redeemed by the future he had helped to forge. But the final revelation was not of earthly struggles or human triumphs. One bitter winter, a few years prior, a severe avalanche had uncovered a hidden cave high on the peaks, one that Silas had spoken of in passing. Inside, carefully preserved by the freezing air, were not bones, but an ancient weathered map, meticulously drawn, showing not only forgotten silver veins but also detailed sketches of a ceremonial Apache burial ground, a sacred place of immense spiritual power, located deep within the valley where their cabin now stood. Tucked beside it was a journal, not Silas's, but his great-grandfather's, with a final faded entry. It revealed that the great-grandfather, a geologist and scholar, had not merely sought minerals, but had become deeply respected by the Apache elders, entrusting him with the secret of their sacred grounds, believing his lineage would one day protect it. The map also detailed a vast network of underground springs, ensuring bountiful harvests for centuries to come. The truth was then unveiled. Silas had known of the sacred grounds, not by chance, but by ancestral design, becoming its silent protector, a role passed down through generations. He was not merely a reclusive mountain man, but the inheritor of a sacred trust, a guardian destined to protect both the land and its ancient people. His sacrifice was not just for Awan and Thomas, but for the very soul of the valley, for the continuation of an ancient lineage. And Silas, the true mountain giant, was not lost to the abyss. He had simply melted back into the mountains, becoming one with the spirit of the land he had protected. He was seen sometimes, a fleeting shadow against a high ridge, a distant figure tending to a hidden spring, his form now a part of the landscape. He watched from afar, his heart full, as the family he had helped to forge thrived. He was no longer a man of solitude by punishment, but by sacred choice. In the gentle sway of the tall grasses, in the murmuring of the stream, in the resilient wildflowers pushing through the snow, he found the confirmation of his life's profound purpose. Though he had left no children of his own blood, he had ensured the continuity of life, of hope, and of a future for these wild, beautiful lands. He was the spiritual father of a new era, a silent sentinel whose legacy whispered in the wind, a testament to the enduring power of sacrifice, the profound strength found in protecting life, and the quiet, undeniable truth that home is not a place, but a feeling of belonging, forged in love and unwavering courage in the heart of the wildest places. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.